Cultural differences can be a tricky thing, as what's normal and acceptable to one person can seem altogether vile to someone else. Finding a way to appease all possible demographics at once is an impossible balancing act, and trying to do so is a fool's errand. As video games have become an increasingly international industry, we've seen the practice of censorship rear its ugly head far too many times. Most often it's when games run afoul of some country's laws regarding what kind of content is appropriate or not, although sometimes it can happen even in the same country the game was made, or even as an act of self-censorship from the developers themselves. But much like a plaster wrapped around a cut in an awkward spot, sometimes the way things are censored is so obvious and awkward that you can't help but laugh, even when you're not supposed to. I'm Peter from TripleJump, and here are the 10 silliest ways games have been censored. Number 10. Grand Theft Auto Vice City. Considering the series is named after what is a serious crime in pretty much every part of the world, it's probably not surprising the Grand Theft Auto series has been subject to some pretty harsh censorship in more than a few countries. Some of the harshest censorship landed on Grand Theft Auto Vice City, an installment that was denied classification in multiple countries due to its violence and other mature content. A notable portion of said content can be found in the mansion that serves as the home base for the game's protagonist, who's chosen to decorate the walls of his home with photos of, a prurient nature. Now, we can't show these pictures, of course, God bless YouTube, but fortunately, neither could the game's Japanese version, so we'll instead show you the same pictures that were shown to Vice City players in Japan. Some pleasant black and white snapshots of flowers, and images of adorable little kittens who have all, for some reason, been given disturbingly large eyes. All in all, this is a simple and clean way to handle the process of covering up naughty content, but definitely a silly one given the context. Also, try not to stare too long into those eyes. Number 9. Half-Life. During the localization process, every country is going to have its own unique standards for what's considered objectionable and what isn't. But with heavy restrictions on violence, blood, and depictions of death that lead to many games being heavily altered or outright banned, Germany often seems to be one of the strictest of them all. Take, for example, the original release of Half-Life, one of the most influential first-person shooters of all time. In-game depictions of gore were removed almost completely in the German release, with enemies no longer bleeding or exploding into bits of meat when killed. Additionally, most of the human enemies in the game have been replaced with robots, complete with their own unique voice clips.
You think he was responsible? Sabotage?
Most hilariously, though, is the fact that you can no longer kill human NPCs in this version of the game. Or rather, you can still hit them with your weapon until they go down, but rather than dying, the characters will simply drop into a sitting position and shake their heads sadly, as if expressing their disapproval of your actions. They're not mad, just disappointed, and that hurts worse than any crowbar to the face ever could. Number 8. Metal Gear Solid Peace Walker. There are many things the Metal Gear Solid series is known for, including giant robots, ninjas, robot ninjas, and bees! And alongside those, the series also seems to have a penchant for torture scenes. Both the original Metal Gear Solid and its threequel included rather infamous moments wherein the protagonist, Snake, must endure a painful interrogation at the hands of the villains, which also means a rather torturous session for the player as they have to button mash their way through the ordeal. Perhaps all too torturous in one part of the world for one specific game. Midway through Metal Gear Solid Peace Walker, Snake is taken captive and tortured for important plot-relevant information by being strung up and zapped with electrified rods, prompting the player to mash buttons to survive amid Snake's blood-curdling screams of agony. Apparently, this was too extreme for Japan, so the scene was tweaked ever so slightly. Instead of enduring pain-inducing electric rods, the implements in question are instead identified as tickle rods that stimulate the body's nerves, and instead of howling in pain, Snake is instead left howling with laughter from the intense tickle torture. It's a bizarre change that's made all the weirder by knowing that similar scenes in the series made it through untouched. I guess sometimes when it comes to censorship, all you can do is laugh. Number 7. Jammer Lammy. As a spin-off of the Parappa the Rapper series, Jammer Lammy follows a similar pattern as the original games, just swapping out the rapping dog for a guitar-playing lamb. You know, for realism. On her quest to become a rock star, Lammy meets many strange characters and visits such exotic locales as the forest, an aeroplane, and let me just check my notes here. Oh yes, the fiery pits of the Netherworld. In the game's 6th chapter, Lammy slips on a banana peel and tragically dies, and her soul is sent to literal hell, though fortunately she's able to make her way back to the land of the living thanks to the power of music. This level can only be found in the Japanese and European versions of Jammer Lammy, however. In the North American version, where hell was seemingly deemed too inappropriate in an otherwise kid-friendly game, the 6th chapter instead begins with Lammy getting her belt caught on a door handle and flung backwards through time, where she lands on a deserted island. Don't worry though, she's able to make her way back home thanks to, you guessed it, the power of music! Honestly, between the two, I'm not even sure which I find more believable. That slipping on a banana peel could be enough to kill someone, or that they make trousers with that much elastic in them. If they do, I could do with a pair. Number 6. Final Fantasy Legend 2. How many successful RPG franchises does one company need? It's apparently not enough for Square Enix to have Final Fantasy when they're also the ones behind other fan-favourite series like the Mana and Saga games, or as they're known in the West, Final Fantasy and Final Fantasy. Initially released as Saga 2 in Japan, the game that international fans would know as Final Fantasy Legend 2 does share some broad similarities with the Final Fantasy franchise, but offers a more open-ended and free-form experience that would come to define the series in later installments. The Saga series I'm talking about now, just to be clear. It gets very confusing calling everything Final Fantasy. The name is not the only change that was made to the game in the West, however. Specifically, there's a major alteration to the plot when the player reaches the town of Edo and finds there's some kind of funny business going on, with the local criminal element trying to smuggle bananas into town. Since any mention of drugs was a big no-no in Western games at the time, the inclusion of bananas was a cover-up for the substance mentioned in the original version, which was opium. In reality though, bananas do have a history as an exotic and highly sought-after luxury item, which could justify why they would be the target of a smuggling ring. Or it could just be because it sounded silly. And if that really was the intention, then congratulations, Square Enix. All these years later, this decision landed you a spot in a list video about silly censorship. You're welcome. Number 5. Serious Sam HD. Oh, look out everyone, I think we've got a bit of a wild card on our hands! Serious Sam is a shooter series cut from the same cloth as the Duke Nukem games, starring a quippy protagonist with a fully loaded arsenal of firearms who sets out to mow down wave after wave of enemies in appropriately violent fashion. The first 2 games in the series received a remastered edition in Serious Sam HD, allowing Sam's brutal exploits to be enjoyed in full high definition for the first time. Among the various gameplay options added is a toggle for the level of gore found in the game. But if you set this to Kids mode, you'll have a significantly altered experience. While there are still enemies galore with which to contend, players will be surprised to find that the death of an enemy at their hands results in not a shower of red viscous fluid, but instead a bright rainbow puff of glitter, sweets, and flowers, as if each enemy had been replaced by a sentient walking piñata. There is still blood aplenty for those who want it though, hence this being a wild card, with the kids mode option included as more of a joke about the kinds of censorship other games had received. The real joke here though is on everyone who didn't play on kids mode, because they didn't get any free sweets. Number 4. Dragon Ball Fusions. Who doesn't love watching a good fight? Nothing gets the blood pumping quite like watching two burly blokes going at it in a round of fisticuffs. But wouldn't it be so much better if it wasn't quite so violent? Fans of the Dragon Ball series certainly have their pick of the litter when it comes to video game adaptations, whether they be the standard fighting game fare, a beat-em-up, or some manner of RPG such as Dragon Ball Fusions for the Nintendo 3DS. As the name implies, Fusions sees players creating, collecting, and fusing together their favourite Dragon Ball characters to create their dream team. However, the novelty of seeing these characters fight was lessened somewhat for American fans when they found out that all sword-wielding characters would have their signature weapons replaced with wooden sticks. According to an interview, the call to censor the swords was made by Nintendo of America rather than the game's publisher, Bandai Namco, with most assuming that the chibi art style of the game made Nintendo feel that realistic blades were out of place in such a kid-friendly aesthetic. Never mind the fact the game was rated for teenagers, or that Nintendo's own games prominently feature children with swords. That's clearly not important here. Number 3. PlayerUnknown's Battlegrounds. As the originator of the Battle Royale genre, PlayerUnknown's Battlegrounds, or PUBG as it's more commonly and concisely known, is an international sensation that was able to draw in literal millions of players from around the world. It certainly helps that it's available on so many platforms, even getting an official version for mobile devices, though this ease of access hasn't kept it from being heavily restricted in China, a country with strict laws regarding any kind of potentially objectionable content in media. To avoid legal trouble, PUBG released a censored version of their mobile edition intended as an alternative for younger players. Retitled Game for Peace, this edition strips away much of the game's violence, replaces the realistic gunfire and blood with flashes of coloured light, and shows players who've been killed simply sitting down on the ground and disappearing instead of, being dead. Interestingly, this wasn't a case of simply altering some assets, as Game for Peace plays notably differently than the original PUBG, even featuring some unique mechanics which has sparked much debate online as to which version is the superior one. God, no matter how censored the game becomes, it seems the PUBG fanbase may never know peace. Number 2. Earthbound. To say that Earthbound, or Mother 2 as it's known in Japan, is rather quirky would be like saying Antarctica is a bit on the chilly side. With a unique retro American setting populated by some utterly bizarre characters and a plot unlike anything else of the era, it provided a singular experience that no other game can quite replicate. A great many changes were made to the game when it left Japan, some for obvious reasons. For example, where originally there was a bar in the Japanese version, the Western release instead replaces this seedy den of iniquity with a much more wholesome cafe. That makes sense given Nintendo of America's harsh stance on alcohol-related content in games, but other changes were made to simply cover up cultural references. One of the healing items players could buy in Mother 2 was strawberry tofu, but Earthbound instead offered the absolutely scrumptious-sounding trout yogurt. Funnily enough, the game's director came up with strawberry tofu as a nonsensical idea for a completely fictional food item, only to later discover that strawberry tofu did in fact exist. Whether the same is true of trout yogurt, I'm simply not brave enough to find out. And number 1, Final Fight. While initially conceived as a sequel to the original Street Fighter, Final Fight eventually pivoted to become one of the original beat-em-ups in the heyday of arcades, introducing a whole generation of youths to concepts like vigilante justice, pile drivers, and eating turkeys out of the bin. With such hot-button issues at play, a number of cuts and edits were made to the game for its English language release on the Super Nintendo, with the intention of censoring any content that could potentially be seen as problematic or offensive. 2 female enemies in the game were replaced with men, for example, so as not to depict violence against women, and some character names were changed to avoid any harsh language. The game's final boss, the mastermind behind the criminal organization who kidnapped the mayor's daughter, was originally shown fighting whilst seated in a wheelchair, but in the censored version it's been replaced with an executive office chair. Presumably this was done out of fear of pushback against the player seemingly assaulting a disabled person, but the end result is instead a battle against a man who could presumably stand up and fight if he wanted to, but just can't be bothered. And honestly, I find that even more terrifying. Imagine how hard he'd be to beat if he actually put any effort in. Ugh.